Welcome into this edition of Making the Leap. We have a good one for you today. It's one we've not tackled before. We talk a lot about why we made the leap. This whole show is about making the leap from what so many of us, like us, moved our daughter from public school to a private Christian school setting. We'd encourage you to explore that same thing, whether that's homeschooling or something else. But one of the reasons that we thought it important to explore why you make the leap is the things that you dealt with, things we've learned, and that is, you were a public school teacher, but who governs public schools? Well, that's your school board, in theory, but there's a lot we learned about school boards through COVID. And there's a lot we learned about what school boards know and what they do, and frankly, what they don't know and what they can't do. And so what was so fortunate is we have a relationship, a friend, who has served as a school board member and a public school board. And she has since made the leap and taken her kids and put them into a private Christian school. But we thought, why not do a show on what it is to sit on a public school board, and what did she see, and what did she learn, and what did she hear, and what should we know about what it is to be on a school board. And by the way, if you're a parent who still has a kid in public school, this would be
This is a perfect episode. Yeah, I think this is a perfect place to
learn
begin.
What to look for and what questions to ask. So we welcome Buffy Smith to the show. Buffy, good to have you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here.
This is I didn't think we'd probably ever do a show about public school boards, but then you're here and we know you, so why not? Everyone associates things going off the rails during COVID, but really, if people were paying attention, it was well before that, wasn't it?
I think so. Yes, I think it was trickling in before that. That brought our attention to it.
How long did you serve on a school board, by the way?
I was there from 2017 to 2023.
So a good run.
So right before, right after COVID, if you will.
That's a heck of a time, too, to be serving on a school board.
Why did you originally decide to run for your school board?
Yes. There were fiscal choices that I wouldn't say I didn't agree with, but was becoming more and more concerned about. There was chatter in the community about them, and I thought maybe a conservative voice, if you will, would be helpful in that conversation.
Was your school board, I know I'm interrupting, was your board primarily, you said bring a conservative voice to that. I talk all the time about, everybody talks about flipping a school board so that it's all one direction and all the other. What was the makeup of the board like as you were getting ready to run and join? Yeah,
so like when you say you needed a conservative voice.
Did you have any? Was there any?
Did you spot that there were none?
That's a good question. I think in 2016, 2017, maybe that wasn't even on our radar. I was just providing my conservative voice.
Okay. You never thought about it. May I infer from that you never thought about school boards as particularly political?
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
I felt that maybe they were spending too much, but I wasn't really thinking of it in the political
that's
aspect.
So liberal of them. You weren't thinking that. You were just like, that's a lot of money.
Yes. Okay. Is this going towards the right direction, right? Programs.
Okay.
You were a public school kid, right? K through 12?
Yes.
Did you think growing up in your community, did your community think of their school or their school board as particularly political? I don't think I did. I'll speak for myself.
No. I had a grandfather who served on a school board. I don't think that was at all a thing. Yeah.
I didn't know until I served as a committee person back in Pennsylvania that it was political. And I figured it out quickly when I was learning that, there's cross-filing and you file as a Republican. And Pennsylvania is set up different than Missouri anyway. So you have to declare a party affiliation for any position. But school boards were still technically supposed to be non-affiliated. So people were cross-filing. But the Republican Party and the Democrat Party were pushing specific candidates. So you learned very, very quickly, well, that is a more conservative candidate. That is a more liberal candidate. And so you then had to work doubly hard, really, to make sure that this person who is a Democrat, isn't ending up getting more votes on the Republican side than the Democrat side. And so I was like, oh, newsflash to me. That was brand new.
You ran because of fiscal issues. How long did it take you once you were in to realize, there's more going on here than just math?
Probably a few months into. I also was very new to having children in the schools.
Okay.
Barely at all.
Okay.
So I was more focused on what is my child learning to read? What are they learning to write? Math, science. And that was when it became, well, it was starting that there was so much more to it. The whole child concept was being discussed. And that was completely new to me.
Psychological stuff? Is that what that means?
Taking care of the whole child, yes. So that could mean anywhere, I think, depending on who interprets it, but the way I'm thinking of it, not only their academics, but are they dressed and fed for school that morning?
Right.
Are they equipped physically to be able to learn? And then you get into the social, psychological, are they ready emotionally to learn?
So almost a foster parent kind of thing.
Correct.
Which is a hard thing. Like, that's, as a teacher, that is something that I know there's a lot of discussion on that. And we talk a lot about, as a teacher, we talked a lot about, well, is it really our job to do A, B, C, and D? But as a teacher, when your kids are coming in the door at 7:30 in the morning and they haven't eaten in a day, they haven't showered in a few days, they have a parent who's working a night shift, there was a lot that, while I don't necessarily think it's a school's place to take care of all those things, I think it is helpful at times for a school to come in and come alongside the parent and help. And so it was a weird balance to try to strike.
Well, and put on your former school board hat then. So we're talking about that kid who hasn't eaten, hasn't slept. It's no fault of his or her own.
Right. They're little. This is the parents' problem.
What is the appropriate? Have you thought much about that as a public school board member? What is the appropriate role there?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is. You can't bring a kid in
They
from
don't
that
care about math.
situation to learn
No,
trigonometry.
They do not care.
They could go anywhere, they're not ready for that. So there is an argument, who does take care of it? It certainly should be the parents.
For sure.
But
And this is where people will fire away at Christian school advocates and homeschool advocates. They'll say, well, what about that kid who's left behind and left without, and public school's all they have, right?
Right.
That's where we get hit a lot.
Yes.
Like we're some sort of elitist club excluding that poor child. So what would you say?
I think with the guardian's permission for that child and guardian input, or at least an attempt to work with the guardian, those children do need it.
Yeah.
There is a role there that you can't be held responsible for test scores of a child who hasn't eaten in 2 days and is expected to walk in and study biology.
And biblically, as Christians, we are not to neglect the widow.
Correct.
We're not to neglect the poor. We're not to neglect them. So I see that argument well. And then I feel like it goes full on out crazy once you get past the basics.
But is that, again, you got to talk about, yes, there's that exception, but what's the rule? And the rule is still, for the most part, most kids have functioning home lives. Most of them do. True?
And that's where I veered off. That is great for those children if their guardians, are working with the schools, or to the best that the schools have the ability to track them down and work with them. What about my child?
Yeah.
They don't need that.
They don't
I
need
really need them to go for 7-8 hours and learn math, reading, writing, science.
Sure.
And I need them to be focused on that. I don't need them to be doing all these other things that I am teaching at home and reiterating at home, or teaching them differently at home. I'm just sending them for those purposes. Our children are in different paths, and that's where we veered off. My child needs something different than that.
Psychological, emotional, physical needs of some children can dominate an entire classroom setting. And other children who are just there specifically to learn because they don't have those needs, they may have to take a back seat.
And that was what I was definitely seeing, was what about my child? At one point I was told, well, they can definitely help in the classroom.
Oh.
And I'm all for it. Maybe there's some valuable skills learned in helping in the classroom.
Had little kids to be told that when you have, we're not talking about a high schooler mentoring somebody else or coming alongside as a tutor. Your kids were just starting school. They've learned how to tie their own shoes. We're not here to send, your little one over to start tying the shoes of the 15 other. You know what I mean? That's ridiculous.
All right, now I'm going to flush us out a little bit because I'll plead guilty. I never set foot in a school board meeting. I didn't know anything about what was going on our kid's school board. Didn't think about it, didn't care to think about it. And then all hell broke loose. And then all of a sudden I'm paying lots of attention. I'm sure to people like you who decided to run and get engaged, people like me who decide, now I want to show up and pound my fist. It's like, well, where have you been? I'm sure you were thinking.
A little. I think that we were all in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
I did take a different approach, but that was rare and unique, and I acknowledged that. I appreciated actually some involvement. I loved talking about the budget or these curriculum items while we had the crowds. We had them for the mask mandates or the back to school or the sports.
All the other
But yeah,
stuff.
let's talk about
Pre-COVID,
everything else.
Did you have, literally, I mean, on any given school board meeting that were open to the public, what was that kind of attendance?
Oh my.
You could count on two hands?
One
One
I
hand?
think.
One.
Yeah.
Outside of staff and presenters and people there for a presentation, specific presentation.
And is that how we got here? Is that how we got here? Years and years of that?
Like
4
maybe
and 5
because in
people showing up at a meeting?
2019 there were 5 people at a meeting, not watching, not paying attention until boom. Do you know what I mean?
I
Like,
think
is
there
that
was a lot of trust.
okay?
I know when
Misplaced trust.
yeah.
Okay.
How often do we trust any stranger with
Sure.
our children
Right.
and send them into a building? Here you go, teach them. I'm sure whatever you're teaching them is great.
That's
That's fine.
really, really good point. And I know we have hit on that at times. I vet everything that comes into contact, anyone that comes into contact with my kids. I think about finding babysitters, things like that, for an hour or two for a night while we go out or whatever. But yet for school, I trusted the masses. I was like, well, it's got a good reputation.
It's
Here
so
we go.
rubber stamp. I
Yes.
mean, we've
Yeah.
all done it. Well,
It's
we're
convenient, it's
we're
easy.
moving here because the school rating, the realtor says the school rating is great. Boom, boom,
Boom.
and it's we stick them on the bus, and well, the schools are great here. Like, we don't ask the questions, do we?
Nope. And I do want to be clear, and I know you all have done this before. I would guess 98%. I don't have a number.
Sure.
Wonderful
Very high.
people.
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful teachers, wonderful things. But when something starts to seep in, it takes hold, it takes root,
Yeah.
and it starts to grow. And that was where the problems came from, not the 98%.
Sure.
It was the small.
It's the mentality of, well, your daughter's fine and it's great that you're taking care of her, but we have a few of these kids over here, so we're not
Yes.
going to. Now all of a sudden you've neglected one group for another, and that's not okay either.
So it must be an incredible indictment then. Are people to read this as a huge indictment? Here you sat on a public school board for years where your children were attending, and then you decided to take them and put them in a Christian school. And I'm sure you caught all kinds of flack for it. In fact, I think you did it before you even left the board, true?
Yes.
And that made you the ultimate in hypocrisy. So how do you explain yourself, ma'am?
Thank you for that. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, we are tasked with doing what is best for our children. And what was best for my children in that time was not where they were. It was not working for us for a multitude of reasons. We were not happy and growing. That is not necessarily the case for everyone. I don't know that every single person I run into should have their children in a private Christian school. It doesn't fit. I think the important thing is that we should all take a look at what we are doing. Don't just do it just because everybody else in the neighborhood does it and that's what you do, or everybody else in the town does it and that's what you do. Is it working for you and for your children? If yes, stay.
Stay.
Perfect. If no, you can do what I did the first time, which was try to fix it. But that wasn't working. So this was the path we chose. It wasn't an indictment. Like I said, there were many amazing people in those buildings who did great work. Overall, the experience was not what we were not getting out of it, what we wanted to get out of it.
And I think what you just said, you just said you can do what you did first, which was try to fix it. And I do think there is a lot to be said for that doesn't feel right to me, that doesn't sound right to me, that isn't okay with me, to take some initial first steps. Yes, I think you could knee-jerk reaction and pull kids immediately, and I'm going to homeschool, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. Or you can say, I'd like to have a conversation. I mean, school board meetings are hard to do that. You don't have a conversation. You're there for 5 minutes, if you're lucky, rattle off your list of concerns, and you walk away, and it's left alone. So I think going into the buildings, being present in the buildings, talking to the administrators, talking to the teachers, following sort of that chain of command first. I don't think you waste months and months and months on it, but I think you do try to establish, like, here are my concerns, and are you being listened to, and are you not? I always advocate for that, no matter what.
Help me understand, Buffy, the hierarchy of this, because just in my time doing talk radio, I have talked a lot about the politics of schools, school districts, school boards, and here are a couple of things that I've observed broadly, and I don't know if you can speak to it or if it applies to you. Often I find that well-intentioned members of the community like you run, you're busy people, you have families, you have your own jobs outside of the thing, you're doing your best, but quite frankly, you don't often have time to just pour and pour and pour over literature that's put in front of you, but there's somebody who does it for you often, and that's called the superintendent. And so oftentimes school boards, elected school board members will say, well, if the superintendent, who's smart and has a big fancy degree on the wall, says it's good, then it's good with us. Is that an accurate summary of what you think a lot of school boards are doing out there?
I definitely saw a lot of that. I didn't really care for that. I did trust. They are professionals. They are experts, and it is a lot to learn. From budget to curriculum to just how to manage a classroom.
And they're trained in it. They're educated in it, right? They have doctorates. They have degrees.
Is it appropriate then to defer to the superintendent as a school board member, do you think?
I think that there are some cases. I think the problem is there's also a reason why the public elects a school board and why the system is set up that way, a system of checks and balances. So I trust that this is a good idea, but I'm going to read about it. I'm going to read through everything and ask questions and request more information is the more appropriate way than just, oh, you said so. Here we go.
And it's good to say that that is one thing that is as frustrated as I was during our time with dealing with school board for such a short time, and it was COVID. The amount of time that all those school board members were spending, whether I agreed with them or not, sifting through constantly changing information. That's different than here's the curriculum that we're vetting. Here's what we're looking at to decide if it's going to work for K through 6 for math, or, now you're doing it's medical information. It's scientific information, economical information. Like, that is mind blowing to me that had to happen. And I do have a lot of sympathy for it, even knowing I was very frustrated with how it was playing out, in real time. But that it's a really good point that you have a layperson, a parent just walking in, and now they have to have a degree, so to speak, in such a wide variety of topics.
And that was where I think it became challenging pre-COVID. We're talking about curriculum. Let's ask questions of this assistant superintendent or this director. The finance, who to ask questions. That was there an expert? Who's the expert?
Right. No.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Here's the other thing that shocked me right out of my chair when I started thinking harder about school boards. I had no idea there was such a thing as a state school board association and a national school board association. Here I am in my 40s, and I thought I knew a thing or two about civics. I never, in a million years, I thought, well, you elect your local school board, and your local school board gets together with your local superintendent, and you decide what's going on in your little community. How naive I was. No, they're part of these statewide confabs who then report to these national confabs, and it's like, well, who are they? And it's all in an attempt, in my view, to kind of harness all focus, all messaging, all curriculum, and funnel it all down to these people that you think are your own localized people. They really are often voices from some large mothership. Fair?
Yes, I didn't have any interaction with the national. I did the state. They would have an annual, I think 2 annual conferences. Pre-COVID, I found them to be very fascinating. I'm not sure if they actually happened post-COVID, but pre-COVID, it was a place where you could go and learn. I mean, all these things, the budget, legislation, curriculum, school safety, security, all these things that we were expected to address. It was a good place to go and hear from experts that they would bring in for a panel discussion. So in that regard, I found it very helpful. I think one of the services they provide is if the state legislature passes a law, rather than every school district interpreting it and writing that into their policy, they'll write one. Each school board still gets to vote upon it, read it and vote upon it. But that way you cut down the work from every school district doing it. I think there can be some benefits, but I also, have seen
a lot of bias that has filtered through.
So do you think, generally, and I know you only have your own perspective, but I mean, would you say that public school boards are still largely autonomous, or are they largely guilty of groupthink now?
I think they can be autonomous. I think they're guilty of groupthink, both. It just depends on how many board members there you have saying, hold on, I have questions.
Right.
Here's a good one.
Yeah.
Why do you think I puzzled over this a lot through COVID, and it seemed that there were people that genuinely got delight in masking and sequestering, and it just seemed like there was an almost personal delight in it. Not all, maybe not even most, but some. Is it a power thing? Is it a climb the ladder thing? Is it a social thing to run and be a member of the school board? I always wonder what motivates people like you to run. I mean, you said you saw some fiscal problems. I think mostly it's altruistic, but I think sometimes there's something more craven about it for some people.
Like savior complex style.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it probably depends too on whether it's a larger community or a smaller community. Could be almost a popularity contest kind of situation. Yes. Now I get to, help make sure that the programs are directed in this direction, whether or not that's social, emotional, or athletic, or I think it's a niche. They have a niche desire, and that's how they're going to go about it.
So it could be something as simple as I like to have a say about the new surface on the high school football field.
Yes.
That kind of stuff.
Yes.
Or let the coach know that I'm on the school board and give my boy a...
Yes. And certainly pre-COVID, I think probably.
That was probably more of it, I would think. Yes. And I know that was the discussion always. You and I have had it. Should a parent who has kids be on the school board? Should your school board, just be comprised of members
Great question.
who don't have kids, because then you don't have that specific interest and that specific pull. You can generally look over.
Great question.
Right?
Do you think it should be a requirement of school boards? You got to have kids in the system in order to serve on that school board.
I do not. I actually valued those who had seen kids through the system. I valued all perspectives, and I saw a wide range. But those perspectives of kids with high school students that I didn't have, or middle school students that I didn't have, or graduates, or just taxpayers who maybe employ students, future students, or employ previous students. I think that having a wide range of backgrounds and interests was valuable.
I was thinking about, we had the woman in our district running, people were enraged because she had her kids in a private school while she was running for the school board, and people that were conservatives were like, blah, 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 blah. I know, and that's why I say that. Now, this woman, in my opinion, had no business being on the school board just based on the things that she was saying and doing, but she had, as far as I was concerned, every right to run. You are a taxpayer. That is your money that they are spending, although people want to argue that too. Do it. I have every right to run with kids being split between two schools. And I think, like you're saying, it is a matter of bringing different perspectives to the table to pay attention to them. But yes, you would not be well received.
Well, so now let's transition to the model of school choice. About 10 states roughly have embraced this idea of universal school choice. That is, take the dollars spent by the state to your public school district, take those dollars and either keep them in the public school district or send them to the school of your choosing for your child. there's a lot of resistance from public schools, obviously, and superintendents specifically, particularly in smaller communities. A lot of resistance to that. So give us a peek into that window. If you're still sitting on a public school board in your community and universal school choice becomes a thing. My thinking is, I always thought to myself, why a defensive posture? My thinking would be, let's go on offense and say, we want those dollars.
Yep.
We're going to be the best thing going for you. But there's a defensiveness, in my view, where a lot of these public school districts, superintendents, and school boards are saying, how dare you come at us? You're trying to ruin us. And I don't think that's much of an endorsement for yourselves. But anyway, speak to that.
I would agree. If you're doing the right thing, you're doing it well, you're meeting the needs of your community, the parents feel you're meeting the needs of your community, employers feel you're meeting the needs of your community, what's the concern?
Mm-hmm. There shouldn't be a problem. Right.
Just like we've always had homeschooling available, we've always had this available. Kids could always choose in some way to leave if they had the means to do so. It's not a big threat if people don't want to leave. So maybe this is an incentive instead to say, why would someone choose to leave here? Answer that question and try to fix that problem.
Could you guess? I mean, could you even guess if universal school choice were an available option in your
Missouri,
community? What percentage could you even guess of parents would take advantage of that and go elsewhere? Do you think it's half? I bet it's not half.
I don't
No.
even think it's 25%.
I think it's very minuscule,
Yeah.
quite frankly. I think that the majority of them, if they wanted to leave, probably already have.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a chunk of people that would like to go, that would like to,
If they could afford
if they
it.
could afford it, if they
I'm sure there are. I just don't think it's a huge percentage.
enough to worry our whole school system's going to fall apart if universal school choice, that's what I think they are afraid of. If universal school choice comes into play and it's an effective,
Well, the smaller the school district, the bigger that worry that we'll all fall apart
Yes.
if universal school choice happens. And I think it's actually less likely to
If it's
happen
smaller, yeah.
in a
Yeah.
small community.
I
yeah.
agree. I agree. I think if you are meeting the needs,
they're not
there's
going
not
to.
a
I mean, I think
concern.
there's a faith-based piece. Sure, that is a piece that the public school is not going to accommodate. And in that regard, great, go. It's still our tax money. I would still like to be able to take it with us. Okay, but then we start diving into things that are not necessarily rooted in a faith issue, such as critical race theory or SEL, and we're talking about those things. Then I think we've got this margin of families. This percentage of families that are saying, wait a minute, I was okay here. Like, I'm okay here as a Christian. I'm okay here until you start to do A, B, or C, and then they want to go.
So before, and there's a second part to this story that we're going to get into in a minute, but staying on your time with the public school board, when we start to entertain topics like critical race theory and gender fluidity and all of these stories that we're all seeing in the news now about teachers in public schools working with kids in secret, and let's keep this from mom and dad because mom and dad might flip their lids, so we'll deal with it here at school. I assume these things started to creep in while you were there, and how prevalent is that? And that's what's getting all the news these days. Is there more that we don't understand, or is that enough?
I didn't see a lot of that. My concern was more the social emotional learning and the whole child development. And I think on its face, we all want our children to be socially, emotionally
Capable, right?
Yes, able.
I agree. Yeah.
And certainly there are children who are not and don't receive that at home. But how that's done is where I started to see the issue.
How big was your school district?
Sorry, what did she mean by that? I'm just curious.
Oh,
What you mean
sure.
by that.
Okay.
I think that is best done either with the parent or by the parent. In the absence of a parent, that's a situation to deal with that individual child. I didn't need that for my children, which is why I think there should be the choice to leave. But it was more of a community-minded aspect than an individual-focused aspect. And while I love my community and think that we should all love our neighbors, obviously, we have to be individuals, and we're taught to be individuals. And
It's kind of like the takes a village to raise a child. while on the surface, I think that's a nice platitude, it gives me chills when I hear it being taken so literally. Well, it's my job to look out for all these other family. It's not your job. It's my job to look out for my family. And yes, if I ask for help or need help, I would love it to be there. But don't bring me help that I did not ask for. Do not push something on me that I do not need.
But you taught, and you're of a different generation, and you're not even that far along. And certainly teachers that are older than you and now retired, like my mother, who taught for 30 years,
right.
they didn't learn to teach this way. I would guess that a lot of these young 20-something kids that are coming out of college and teaching now have this different attitude that they're almost social workers. Mm-hmm. Is that fair or unfair?
I think whether they think it or it's part of
the culture.
Happening. Yes, mm-hmm. It certainly is. And to your point, Christine, I had issues, health issues, where I needed a village to mm-hmm. help raise my children for mm-hmm. a short time, mm-hmm. and I was very blessed to have that village. Mm-hmm. It was the village I chose. And I was still in control of that village, right. and the message that was coming right. from that village and what right. was happening in that village. And that's the difference.
I think that
it's
is
my village.
And you could
yes.
throw a villager out if you didn't like
right.
it. Yeah.
I don't like you, leave. Well, I think that's the part that blew my mind was specifically during COVID, but we were seeing it beforehand, well before COVID, we were seeing it. But for example, I've told this story before. Our daughter was in 6th grade. She was on the computer for learning. I'll never forget it. It was right at Halloween, and the kids were all home at that time still. And everything was, are we going to have Halloween? Are we going to have trick-or-treating or whatever? And I know not everybody does Halloween and trick-or-treating. This is just my, for our family at that time. And the teacher was asking, like, what are you guys going to do for Halloween? And as the kids were answering, I was watching the teacher, and she was getting more and more surprised and a little upset at their answers, because these kids were like, I'm going as a whatever, Batman. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be this. And she kept saying, this is COVID. She was like, finally, she just said it. She goes, you guys, this isn't safe. Oh my gosh, please go. Please be careful while you're out. Oh, do you really have to go? So she expected a different answer, didn't get it. I was in the kitchen. So Anna was sitting at the table. I was on the opposite side of Anna because I'd kind of walked around, and my eyes, I think, just bugged out of my head. And she was looking at me like, oh gosh, I know mom's not happy, with this or whatever. But we finished, that class finished, and that is where I was just done.
The school teacher was making a values judgment.
And implying that the one I was making to allow her to go was wrong. We can't, that's not the village I want. That's where I think that is not okay for that parent, for that teacher to imply and to insinuate and to flat out say, are you sure? Like, no, you don't do that.
The irony of COVID, for me, I had health issues right up to COVID, the point that it started.
Right.
And I was probably safer than most people around me, masking and distancing and whatnot. That was for me. That was because I needed to. Not everybody else didn't need to do what I do. I didn't need to force what I was doing upon everyone else around me. I needed to look out for me, my family, and everyone else do the same for themselves. And that's where I think a lot of things get off, is that just because I'm doing it doesn't mean everyone else has to do it.
Yeah, we popped the chip off the motherboard or something when we started this notion that the things that go on in school are almost at odds with, or there's this great wall from home. I mean, it used to be teachers would lament not getting help from home.
Right, and now
there seems to be a culture of, shut up you at home, we'll handle it here. I don't know when that happened exactly, but here we are.
Yeah, and I volunteered in the classroom pre-COVID. It was great. We left during that shift, if you will. So I don't know what things are like there now. I certainly do it now.
Right.
So in summary, before we move off of your time with public school and the public school board, what would you advise parents to do if their kids are still in public school? Is there something more they should learn or know about their school board? Do you encourage people to run? Would you do it again?
A lot of questions for you.
Yes, I'll ask questions, understand, know what's being taught. You might agree with every word of it, and if so, that is wonderful. But you should know what is going on in the school. The curriculum should be available. It should be easy to read. It's a lot, but I've done it year after year. It's doable. Just make sure that you know. Involve yourself in those conversations. If a new program is introduced, ask for a copy of it. Read through it. Ask questions. Ask why, too. With all these new programs, there's two things that happen. Something else is being displaced, and the teacher's workload becomes higher, and they're already maxed out. So why? Why was this more important than anything else they were doing already? What problem does this need to fix? And if it's not a problem for your child, why is your child having to do it? Ask a lot of questions, involve yourself, and if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut. It probably isn't.
Should you run? Can you? Would you do it again? I mean, I think the answer is no for you, but
no for me.
I've heard some people very defeatist. Pete Hegseth is one of those guys. He told us months ago when we first started the show. He said, "God bless you. It's a noble thing, but I don't think we can save the state of public schools." He was sort of fatalist about it. You?
Definitely. I was very optimistic, very naive when I ran. I'm going to fix this and everything will be wonderful and live happily ever after. I couldn't.
Because
there were so many things that people would come to me about. Teachers were overwhelmed and overworked, and you have special needs to work with. You have children who show up without food, without parental support, then the finances, and it's a lot, especially for a volunteer who's doing it, a few hours a week in your spare time with kids and jobs. I think it's a noble thing. I encourage anyone who has the gumption to do it, definitely do it. But I think that there are other ways for me to spend my time now after I've tried and I've learned I can influence the world in better ways.
We've talked about this show after show. What you've just laid out and displayed, there are many who would be listening or have listened in the past and have sent us notes, something like, everything Buffy just said about public school, now you've talked about moving your kids to Christian school, and what makes you think that system will fundamentally end up any different? I've heard that criticism a lot, and I'm going to be perfectly frank with you. I'm now more mindful than I used to be of, maybe there's something to that, and these homeschoolers might be onto something. If you want it done right, do it yourself. What do you say about that?
I would absolutely agree with that. I am probably overwired now to be on guard and watch and read everything. As someone who spent 6 years reading curriculum and school budgets and school program plans in their free time, I'll dedicate some hours to it, and I'm used to it, and I know what to look for and what to be wary of and where things start and how they can progress since my 6 years' time. And if I had the patience to homeschool my children and thought my family could survive it, I probably would. But I'm not wired to do that. I figured that out about myself, so this was the next best step. But certainly, you can't. I think what I learned is you can't send your children somewhere for 8 hours and say, there you go, see you when I pick you up, and trust that everything is going to be perfect.
And that's a very, very fair statement. I think we spent the first year feeling nothing but relief that we had switched. Still hard, still scary, still overwhelming. But that first year, I was like, man, this is good, And then the second year, I started dialing back in. Like once I felt like we kind of got our footing a little bit, I kind of was like, what are we doing?
Yeah, and also we heard from parents who were at the school. It's funny because we thought to ourselves we were making some huge, monumental decision, and we did it. Like you said, whew, But then we started getting met with parents that said, have you heard what they're doing now? And you're thinking,
literally within 2 months of
man.
coming. And I was like, I don't have time. I don't have the brain width for this.
No, and we would get kind of agitated.
Yeah.
I'd say, are you serious? Like, you've got it now, you're still dealing with this stuff?
And I also think I've said it numerous times, it is so much better here than it was there. So I'm all right with what I am. And I don't think that is necessarily the best mentality to have. Like, it's good, but to say, like, well, it could be worse, so I'm okay with letting this float through the cracks or this go, that's not all right either.
Which brings us to the question then.
Right.
You having sent your children now to a Christian school and you're on guard because you know this stuff, you're very well aware of how a Christian school could easily become no different than what you just left.
Absolutely. And I think the difference is in how things are handled. Maybe in a smaller school, in a school where people know each other, I was able to go in and sit down when I did have concerns and say, here are my concerns, I'm laying them out. And how it was approached was different. It was less defensive, my questioning, my concerns. But they don't have to necessarily do what one parent comes in and says, I'm concerned about this and don't like it. That's not fair to them either.
No, to shout like, well, I pay tuition. Well, so do all the other families there too. So it isn't that.
Get us Christian school parents smarter here. What do you think, as a former public school board member, now with kids in Christian school, with eyes wide open on things like these, what must Christian schools guard against in terms of, if you want to say curriculum or policy or just the general politics of the public school system that we were all trying to stay away from? What could trickle into a Christian school setting, do you think?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to go in eyes wide open, and you have to still pay attention, the same level that you would anywhere else. And you still have to follow everything. And I think most important is being leery of these outside programs. What we loved most about our school, is the school that we're in now, is that the teachers poured into the children, not as substitutes for us, or not as replacements for us, just there while we weren't, and really cared about each child and treated each child like they were an individual.
Personalized.
Yes, but not replacements for what we were teaching at home, rather support for what we were teaching at home. So any programs that come in that contradict that, I think we need to be leery of. Anything that treats children not like individuals, but starting the community aspect, that everybody's the same, and we're going to treat everyone the same. We are going to treat everyone. We're going to treat everyone with
creepy
love.
Vibes. Like, even as you say that gives me like George Orwell vibes. Like, I sit here thinking.
Honestly, though, Buffy, is there anything that, and I say this with respect to people that create curriculums or whatever, because I don't know what goes into it, but doesn't it by its very nature have to be collectivist to sell it to a school or a district? The mentality has to be, here is this thing I've made, inject it into your system, and all will learn it and digest it and be subject to the same rules and applications. And that's what you mean. That's not personalized anymore. Now it's...
Right. So I would be leery of all of them, probably. Yeah. And I haven't read them all, but that, I think, therein is the problem.
Who brings those into a school, like a Christian school? Who's responsible for bringing those, introducing
in your
those
opinion,
kinds
you
of
may
things?
not, you're not,
yeah,
we know
yeah,
you're
I
not
don't know that,
but
I would say there probably have been, an issue has been targeted. How do you treat it? Some sort of curriculum to address, let's say, bullying. So let's bring in a bullying addressing program, which makes everyone treat everyone this way, which honestly should be everybody treat each other nicely. And if you don't, there's going to be consequences to your actions.
Right.
Why can't we do that without a guide? I mean, I thought that's what we loved about this school, about our school, is that's what it was. You're going to treat everyone with respect, with kindness, with love, and if not, here are some consequences that you will face.
And Well, I'm totally going to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, you're
because everything that you're saying, that's biblical.
Right.
There are biblical bases for all those statements you just made where what you're saying.
You have to spend 20
right, you don't have
grand
to spend
on
a bunch of money.
consultant. I mean,
Right.
there's the Bible
Right.
for that, I think. It's been written already.
The guide's already here.
Right. And so we
Yeah.
have, if you don't even want to, I would like to, but if you don't want to talk about the whole Bible, just let's talk about the 10 Commandments. Let's just talk about those in and of themselves without a lot of extra being pulled in. Now, I know that is simplifying things.
Well, let
Of
me
course,
ask a
there's
really
more,
direct
but-
question. Do Christian schools need any outside programs, period, full stop?
I'm going to
I'll
have
let
a
you-
hard time answering
that's
that.
a good one.
I know. I'm not an expert, and I'm not in their classroom, and I'm not dealing with what they have to deal with each and every day.
Yeah.
I can only say what my child needs.
Yeah.
And it is, if they are not treating their friends with respect and love and kindness, they need to call their mom, and that will be reinforced at home.
Yeah.
Well, I
That's
know-
how I would like it to be handled, is if this isn't working, if they are not behaving, let's handle them. Let's not teach, if they're not behaving and respecting and treating others with kindness, don't punish the rest of the class.
25 kids don't need to be treated as bullies.
Yeah, don't pull them
Yeah.
away from math to learn how not to bully because my child is bullying. Let's address my child
Yeah.
or the bully or whoever
Right.
it may be. They're there to learn a lot, so focus on that. And then if they're not behaving appropriately, let's handle them
I think there
appropriately.
we have where our daughter is. We have something called community groups, and I don't know that they do that in the elementary.
Yes, they do.
They do.
Oh, wait, no, they might
I
not.
think it's
Yeah.
middle school and up. I again could be wrong. I just know for sure it exists for middle school and high school, and that is time set aside each week. And in there, I had the option. I had the ability to attend one this year, and I really enjoyed it. It was a team of teachers. It was 3. Actually, I don't know if they were all teachers, but volunteers/teachers, people that the school definitely, I think, held in high regard with the group of, let's say, freshman girls. So there's, I think, 11 girls, right? And that was time set aside following chapel to talk about what had just occurred at chapel. You know, what was the message? What are your prayer concerns? And that felt like a great time to address something like anxiety that might be prevalent in students, or man, this issue that we've got in the freshman class or the sophomore class or the 8th grade class. Let's talk about that, because we are a community. We do want a community feel in our school. That felt like a good time to tack something else on top of it. That's where, as a parent for myself, I think, do we have to take away that? Because I don't think of chapel and community time, the community group's time, as taking away from, but then, you know, they have an altered schedule that day, everything continues, but that's one, you know, it's one day. Biblical principles are being infused in all the different classes. Do we need to have more? So when you say, is there, you know, are there ever any programs? I'm sure there are, but most of it, I feel like if you create smaller groups that allow for real connections with trusted adults, with mentors, I feel like that helps
Yes.
tremendously.
We've experienced the same, and that's what we love about our school is it addresses those issues built into the normal day.
So if a school says, oh gosh, we've never seen so many kids with so much anxiety, we don't know what to do, I think that comes from a well-intentioned place.
Oh yeah.
I get it. You know, somebody that's been in Christian education for 30 years,
Oh, it's got to be.
and now suddenly there's this tidal wave of kids pouring in from public schools who are, you know, probably pretty
not
emotional
just-
and whatever.
Not just that, but also just their current students that experienced the
Well,
trauma
that's
of
right.
what this was, right? Because we can't ignore any of that.
So we've wrecked our kids, and a lot of well-intentioned Christian schools are trying to figure out how to deal with a bunch of wrecked kids. Then some well-meaning counselor type comes along and says, well, I've got a program from Wayne Smith down the street who 12 Steps to Happiness for Kids. Well, let's implement that. All in favor? Aye. And then all of a sudden, you're starting to bring in outside cultural influence into your school and dealing with something. And now I see how that's a recipe for disaster for a Christian school, if not careful.
Very well intentioned.
Yeah.
Could work beautifully. Hopefully, it works beautifully. I would proceed with caution. And I think that's where parents need to watch and question and make sure that as they move down that path, we're all involved, or they're all involved, and keeping tabs on it and making sure that if that's the intention and that's the issue that is needing to be addressed, that it does. Are there measures to study it in a year or two and see, is it working? Is it
Do we have a
effective?
baseline before we start?
Yes.
Do we have, I agree with that
And
too.
if not, let's walk it out. What could
That's
happen
not
to a
working.
Christian school if they don't watch these things? What would you see happening? What could you see happening?
Well, if it's not working in 2 years and you don't say, okay, that's not working, try something new, or just keep, okay, well, that's not working, so we got to add to it. That's where I worry is where do you go from here? Do you just keep escalating? And what is the escalation? Okay, now everybody is treated exactly the same. And at all times, we're all going to learn exactly in the same manner. That's not effective.
Well, it's funny because
These are all well-intentioned.
yes, we've experienced it since we entered the school with our daughter. We know people who hightailed it out of there because they just didn't like what they saw as explosive growth, which is hilarious to me because, we're talking about kids that came from classes of 500, 600, 700, 800. Now we're talking about classes of 25, 26. And there were people that left the school and said, too big. It's getting crazy. I don't want anything to do with this crazy thing. So there's a huge cultural shift happening for people that have raised their kids well before this became an in vogue thing. They already feel like it's been highly compromised and hijacked, right?
Yes, and I feel, we are part of that problem. And I feel for them if that's what they
we are
were
too.
wanting.
We are too. Right.
And that's the important thing, though, is that we all keep in mind what we want for our children and make that choice based on what is best for them.
Absolutely.
Sometimes
this
it's
is good
hard.
stuff. This is good stuff. Well, this was fun because this is firsthand. This isn't conjecture. This is somebody who's literally walked it on both sides of it. So, thank you for your time today. Any parting words of advice to parents?
Thank you for having me. I just reiterate what I've said several times. Be open to it. Be aware of it. Ask questions respectfully, politely.
Yes.
Teachers and administrators across all spectrums have good intentions, I do believe.
And school
Almost
board
all of
members?
them, school board members included.
Yeah.
Just what we want out of life and how we get it is where we all differ. And
Yeah.
Be
We're
respectful.
individuals.
And I
that.
think we're lucky enough now also to be in a place, yes, geographically, but also just the time in our culture where truly, if there is something that you don't like, there are so many avenues to take to either fix it, address it, move, change. It doesn't have to be A or B anymore. I feel like we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G available, and with some creativity and maybe some different kind of financial planning or structure, things like that, we can access a lot of different options. So I think that's
And
important.
you will find all those different options in many of the previous shows on this podcast that I hope you'll listen to and give a 5-star review and a written review and let us know if you have a guest idea or maybe you yourself would like to be a guest. And until next week, Buffy, thank you. We will see you on Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. Please rate and comment on the show, as well as subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.